Did you know Ali much? After when you said...
oh, yeah, I knew him when he was a kid boxer. And always a fan. Because to reach the top of your field, it takes more than physical ability. You have to know what you're doing to get to the top of your field, no matter what the field. Because there are things you have to do to execute what it takes to be the top of your field. And so Ali was not only a great boxer, but he's a psychologist and a brave man. I was in Boston one day, and a guy says, I want you to disavow Muhammad Ali. What? I want you to put him in his place. I said, I'm not going to do anything like that. He said, you want to disavow? I said, heck no. He said, well, I think you ought to do that. I said, I don't care what you think. If I had a choice between you and Ali, you wouldn't even be in the race. Are you kidding? So he started calling me Felton X after that. You know, they used to call the Muslims with an X. You know, Malcolm X and all that. Us, you know.
Didn't you, when he got drafted, didn't you organize a group of...
I didn't organize, Jim Brown organized.
Jim Brown organized, but you joined it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just to support his decision.
Yes. Well, you see, the thing is, what you have to think about is, for his decision not to go in the Army, if you read what it was based on, arbitrarily they decided to change his status without a hearing or anything. Just, we're going to change it. Well, that's not right. You know, from what category he was in, I'm not sure, but they changed it to 1A. So now we're going to put you in the Army. Well, you can't do that. You know, there's a...
Was that... I'm groping for a way to ask, what was the time that you felt was most controversial, your most controversial stance?
Who, me?
Yeah, in your career, when you got the most heat for something that you felt or believed or said or didn't say?
Well, it started with, when I got to Boston, I had not started to shave. Okay? You know, you reach a certain age and you say, okay, now you shave. I hadn't reached that when I got to Boston. So I spent the first 3 or 4 months there explaining why I had a beard and why I shouldn't shave it off. And the more they questioned, the more I dug in my heels. You know, because going back to college, as a freshman, they had to buy you a pair of shoes, basketball shoes. And I bought a pair of white ones. And the varsity coach says, we wear black shoes. I said, that's the varsity. This is the freshman team. He said, you should get black shoes so you'll be like the rest of them. I said, Coach, I had nothing I could ever do to look like the rest of these guys. There were 2 black guys there were 4 black guys on the varsity and the junior varsity, on the freshmen. So there's no way I was going to look like the rest of those guys. you know. And so, one thing I got from my dad was to analyze and come to conclusions from my own perspective. See, I cannot tell you who your hero should be. And you'd be wrong if you think you could tell me who my hero should be. In fact, who was it? Bill Walton, who's a dear friend, and I think a really good guy, okay? We were talking about growing up, and in the conversation he said to me, we come from two different worlds. Really? You know, a friend of mine, a young guy named Yao Ming. He plays, he's retired now. He's playing for the Houston Rockets, and he asked if he could have a conversation with me. I said, okay. So he came to my house for dinner here. And we were talking about his career. And I said, there's one thing you should be very aware of and never lose sight of. You are a very tall Chinese man. Embrace it. I said, always embrace your mother and father and the culture you grew up in. And I said, always be true to who you are and what you are. And that, to me, is a positive thing, not a negative thing. Because you can be Chinese and love the Chinese without hating the Americans, which some people will try to conclude. You see, you can embrace who you are and what you are and be a positive impact in your life.
All right, we want to resume talking a little bit about your relationship with the city of Boston and how it changed from the time you were back there playing until modern days when you made peace to some degree with certain people there.
That never happened.
It never happened.
See, where other people thought I was bothered, but I was never bothered. I was, they got my attention about certain things, but I always was able to maintain control. Just like one of the things that annoyed the media there was they turned their head, they looked up, and I was gone.
The context of white supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. It is not Turkey Day. It may be Thursday, November 24, 2022, so I've been told, but it is not Turkey Day. It is the Cows Week. We've been on every day, and we continue the book club, Katherine Massey Book Club. In fact, if I could pause 1 second, they had the flippin' Buffalo Bills, they being the NFL, playing on Thanksgiving Day. Shout to Rental James. They started the game off with a tacky tribute, so-called, to the black victims of the Tops Massacre, May of this year. And they talked to some of the black people, and they talked about how some of the victims of that shooting were such big Buffalo Bills fans and Go Bills Mafia. What? I mean, you want to talk about nauseating. You think chitlins are funky and make you want to throw up? Wow. Just build a grocery store in the East Side and warn black children to stay away from brain damage football. That's all we need, not some lying, oh, we care about the victims. Anyway, Katherine Massey Book Club, context of white, like Katherine Massey loved the Bills. Get out of here. Anyway, we are wrapping up Bill Russell's second win, Memoirs of an Opinionated Man, all done today. It has been quite an experience. We had extra programs. Dr. Aram Goodsouzian was with us, and even this week we had Benjamin Green talking about the Harlem Globetrotters and Abe Saperstein. Just wow, I've learned so much. Again, if you have children, or even if you have attempted spouse, fathers, they're basketball fans, maybe they should study a little bit about Bill Russell to aid and improve their understanding of racism, white supremacy, what it means to be white. Quickly, that audio segment, that was Bill Russell, co-author Taylor Branch, white man suspected racist. We heard about him not shaving last week and how much that angered white people. Telling a white man came up and said, look here, Feltnex, we need you to renounce, denounce, and reject Louis Farrakhan. Got confused about my Negro Muslim. Not Louis Farrakhan. We need you to renounce and reject Muhammad Ali, because he's a no-count scoundrel. Probably called him Cassius Clay. They weren't big on the name change. Anywho, we are picking up the final chapter, second win. We will wrap it all up today. We get a big-time shout-out for Seattle Go Supersonics. Katherine Massey Book Club, context of white supremacy, the great William Felton Russell, second win, the first and last audio segment. Even kids divided me. Many of my happiest moments had been around children, Africans, Latin Americans, blacks, whites, any kids except a junior autograph hound, and yet my own 3 children were virtual strangers to me when I left Boston. I had to become closer to my kids, of that I was certain, and it was the first strong, unconflicted feeling I had in L.A. At the ages of 13, 11, and 8, they started spending summers with me out there. I remember those times as ones of heartache and perplexity. I wanted to squeeze and hug them until the tears ran dry, just to make up for all the time I'd missed, but caution made me hang back because I didn't really know how to handle them well. Even a full-time parent would have had trouble with them at such ages, I believe, and there I was getting to know them while I was trying to sample every lifestyle and golf course in the vicinity. Looking back, a lot of our times together were funny. I was quite unconscious of the contradictions in my behavior, but the children weren't. They didn't hesitate to point out how strange it was that I'd make them fasten their seat belts in the car as we drove out to a motocross course where we all rode motorcycles and half killed ourselves. It was perfectly logical to me, but the kids got on my case. They hit me with larger questions, too. It wasn't long before one of my sons confided how much he'd always admired my fancy cars, clothes, and friends. Therefore, he announced, he wanted to let me know that it was his ambition to become a pimp. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry that this was his interpretation of the role model I provided. My daughter, on the other hand, blindsided me from the opposite direction. She always responded to the side of me that didn't smoke, drink, or compromise in the search for a life of principles, and she told me in no uncertain terms that I shouldn't have any overnight girlfriends. It was immoral, she felt, and she didn't mind letting me know it. So I had a son who looked to me for a pimp's luxury, and a daughter who looked to me for a saint's purity, and both of them were regularly disappointed. I think all three of them were a little afraid of me in those Los Angeles years, but that didn't stop them from posing questions that no one else would ask. All the whipsawing I took was nothing compared with what the kids dished out to my women friends. If they liked her, they'd say, "Oh, don't do that. Daddy's last girlfriend did that." And if they didn't like her, they'd say, "Oh, don't do that. Daddy has another girlfriend who always does it." They had an uncanny ability to zero in on a woman's weakest point and pick at it, dropping the most ruthless comments with the most common innocent faces. I had to do a lot of retreating, throat clearing, and hurried repair work. I noticed that at least one of them would take an intense dislike to any woman who came over more than twice. This was natural, I figured. They didn't want anyone to replace Rose, their mother. The situation reminded me of the way my brother and I had made life miserable for all Mr. Charlie's women friends after our mother had died. We didn't want him to go out with anyone, and we alternated in driving them crazy. Looking at things from the parents' point of view for the first time, I realized how unfair we had been to Mr. Charlie. We had done everything we could to keep him from remarrying, and then, when we grew up, we moved back east and left him behind in California. Fortunately, Mr. Charlie had the good sense and strength to ignore us and remarry. Those summers with the kids brought me the first inklings of what was going on inside me out in Los Angeles. There were so many me's running around all over the place, and frequently they'd collide with each other like cartoon characters. When this happened, it was a shock, but it also made me laugh. Those little people inside me had an enormous amount of energy and always ran at full speed. If any one of them got tired, there was another one waiting to take off. That's the way it felt, at least. I took a hard run at vegetarianism and golf, and an even harder run in my personal relationships. When those weren't enough, I added lecture tours and later network sports commentary for ABC. I was also trying to get to know the kids and to keep up with current events. All these still weren't enough, so I started the Bill Russell Show on radio, broadcasting during the afternoon rush hour. it's hard to convey how much fun I had on that show. I just let loose and explore the world on the air. Hello out there, you sweating commuters, I might say. The traffic picture is hopeless. You're going to be out there a long time, so you might as well get used to it and relax. Think about all the things you're glad you're not doing. While you're thinking, here are some sports scores: 3-6, 1-6, 0-4, 4, and 2. And here are some cities to go with those scores: New York, Baltimore, Atlanta, Oakland, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, and Dallas. That's the sports. Strangely, I had enough energy to do all these activities. Sometimes I'd do a few college lectures on my way to cover a basketball game, and while on the road, I'd do the radio show by telephone every afternoon, then spend half the night talking to friends around the country. That's when I learned the value of dialing direct. When I flew back to L.A., I'd go straight to the golf course, then to the radio studio, and then over to a friend's for dinner and a talk through the night. I was living at full speed with everything I'd ever had in the NBA, competition, road life, challenges, except championships, but also with everything I'd missed while playing basketball. Or so I thought. Occasionally, I had glimpses that there were gaping contradictions within me, but I ignored them. There was no way that I was going to come to grips with them then. The hardest task I know of is to detect the paradoxes within yourself clearly, sparing yourself nothing, and to give up the hypocrisy of thinking that you can have everything by stretching yourself to embrace every ideal and its opposite. I had no desire to resolve any of those clashes at that time because I was having too much fun. Of course, there were human casualties as a result of this new life. Mary was the main one. We had loved each other for several years and had more or less made the transition from Boston to Los Angeles together. She came for longer and longer visits and finally stayed. Through many trials and changes, she was the first woman of consequence in my life who was simply a woman instead of a phenomenon like Rose, Iodine, and Kitty were, each in her different way. Instead of becoming some larger-than-life force such as marriage, passion, or friend, Mary was a little of each. She was a beautiful, intelligent woman who loved adventure. Around my friends, she usually was reserved, but she had a sharp eye for character and was always open. After an evening with people who were strangers to her, I could hardly wait to ask her what she thought of them. Then she'd talk. When we were alone, would she talk? We were like an orchestra. I'd start off with a little bass fiddle, and then she'd sweep in with the violins. I could be alone with her. There'd be no other forces in the room. Most women, I'd found, demand certain emotions and attitudes from you, and if you don't show them the side of you they expect, something bad will happen. You can feel it as soon as you enter the room, Parts of you are stifled before anyone says anything. Years later, you may find yourself thinking, I'm not really myself when I'm around her. This never happened to me with Mary. However I wanted to be, she made me aware that she loved me, and she was the first woman since my mother who had been able to communicate this to me. I could feel the human contact, not just hear the words. Her love for me was so unqualified that it touched me inside the shell I'd built up over the previous 20 years. Mary seemed to be self-contained. She could come to the radio studio and sit silently for hours, watching and thinking. Some of the technicians at the station never even realized that we were together. On road trips, she'd sit and read for hundreds of miles with her mind way off somewhere. Many of the books she liked were in foreign languages, mostly German. She would retreat into herself the way I do and then project feelings that would squeeze my heart. Once, when we were driving east from California, I looked over at her not long after we had crossed the border into New Mexico. Tears were falling into her lap, and I got so scared that I almost drove off the road. It was the road signs, she said. We had passed a number of big, gaudy signs advertising Chief So-and-so's souvenir shop, and Mary was crying at the idea of hundreds of years of Indian dignity reduced to hawking pots and beads. She started talking about Indian culture, and pretty soon our orchestra was going strong. Mary insisted on making a lot of my clothes, standing on a chair to measure me. At first I resisted. I'm particular about my clothes. But I became more attached to what she made than I'd have thought possible. When I was alone on a speaking tour in a motel somewhere between Idaho and Arkansas and put on one of Mary's suits, it was like having her arms around me. I could feel her measuring me for that suit and remember the jokes I'd cracked while she was doing so. Before long, I found myself looking forward to wearing her clothes. They were like getting fresh flowers every morning. In comparison, even my tailor's work began to feel as cold as a suit of armor. Mary spent a lot of time waiting for me. I was gone more than I was there. I'd come home and see her for a few days, then vanish again for a week. Sometimes I'd withdraw. Occasionally I'd go away with another woman, and often would run off to play golf, work, or ride a motorcycle. I'd fly by, always expecting her to be the same, always amazed at how good she was, and then take off again. During those years, I was bouncing from one activity to another so fast that Mary could never get a fix on me for long. She would be everything in the world to me when I was in her company, but soon I'd become obsessed with other people or places and leave. It never occurred to me that she might not be as happy without me as she was with me. I was rushing along from moment to moment, and I assumed that everyone else was doing the same. About every 6 months, I'd wear Mary out. She'd hang on while I cartwheeled through all my moods, and then would fly back to her family in Boston for a few weeks to refuel, build up her confidence, and then return to try again. All she wanted was to love me and have me love her. It was a period in her life when everything else seemed insignificant, and she was caught, much the way I'd been enmeshed with iodine. I simply wasn't capable of being what she wanted me to be because I was not in control of myself. I loved her, but I loved everything and nothing all at once. Finally, when Mary had taken all she could, she announced, as usual, that she was returning to Boston for a while. As always, I was jolted, and I asked her to be sure to come back. As usual, she promised she would, but I think both of us knew she wouldn't. Something was broken. Relationships between lovers have a certain resilience, but one day you take it too far and it's not able to bounce back. Unfortunately, that's the point where a lot of people become so frightened that they try to save the situation by getting married. Mary was too strong for that. She simply left permanently to protect herself. I was hurt when Mary left, but later on it hurt even more. She could handle me as long as I was there, but she could not cope when I was gone. I was going too fast to see this, so I ran over her. If you're strong-willed or oblivious, you can do that to somebody just in trying to get from one place to another. It's almost like running over a deer on the highway. You don't mean any harm, though it would be hard to tell the deer this, but you've collided at the wrong place and wrong time, and before you know it, the damage is done. It's best not to look back or cry, so you keep going. My spirits sank when I realized what Mary had given me. She'd made me believe that I could love and be loved again, and was the first person since my mother that I felt I could trust completely. I knew she would never lie to me. In fact, she was so honest that if anybody else lied in her presence, she'd turn red. She was just as honest when she revealed herself to me and in accepting what I revealed of myself to her, which made me feel better than I thought was possible. I knew that other women had loved me, but it never hit me the way Mary did. There are some things you know, and other things that have an impact. I didn't realize it then, but it was from Mary that I learned to start friendships with women from a broader base, simply because she had shown me the feeling I wanted with a woman. Once you've experienced that feeling, you can't accept less. At least I thought that I now knew what I was looking for. She had given me a great deal, and in return I had given her a lot of pain. I had broken as strong a feeling as she could have, and had destroyed what I wanted more than anything else. For a long time after she'd gone, I felt so much guilt and loss that I actually wished I'd never met her. I was well into my 4 Los Angeles years before I realized that sometimes I have a domineering personality around women. In my mind, it had always been so much the reverse that I couldn't see how my silence, words, or presence could threaten the atmosphere between us. I realized I would have to give women space to allow them to express themselves, and that I'd have to do it consciously because it didn't come naturally. even when I was afraid inside, I could intimidate people. It had happened for years with Rose, I realized. Hey, you can be downright dangerous, I told myself. Once I had this insight, I went right on behaving the same way, except that I tried to warn women that I was a hazard. They should be free and easy in our relationship with no expectations. But this resulted in a string of weak relationships that reminded me of the do your own thing period of the 1960s, when everybody did his own thing in so much the same way that it was like a series of soap operas. We'd frolic together for a few months, and then, in spite of everything, sooner or later, we'd have the same conversation. You want to get married? No, I don't want to get married. Why? Don't you love me? In a way, I love you. You know that. Well then, why don't you want to get married? I just don't want to get married. Well, I have to stop seeing you then. Why? There's no future in it. Well, what's wrong with just enjoying it now? You can worry so much about the future that one day you'll look up and you won't have a past. But if I hang around with you, I won't have a future, the woman would say, and that would be the end of it. There was another conversation that wasn't much different. What do you want from me? I'd ask. Nothing, she'd say. I'd shake my head. Uh-oh, that means everything. Nothing means nothing in particular. You just want it all. I felt so isolated during this period that I was happy to see the mailman every day. For all my running around, there was nothing and no one left for me to touch except the space that Mary had left. I was close to feeling sorry for myself, which set off alarm systems in my head. I could see Frank Ramsey flashing his toothless grin at me on the court and hear Mr. Charlie lecturing me when I was little. If there was one thing that Mr. Charlie had never stood for, it was self-pity. He called it the most evil emotion in the world and said there wouldn't be any of it around his house. I think blacks have an advantage in dealing with self-pity because we've had so many opportunities to confront the impulse. Mr. Charlie's method of handling it was to fight it by making a virtue of independence. He and the old man had a saying, "If you see me in a fight with a bear, don't help me, help the bear." I've tried to live up to this, but there are limits. In L.A., I gradually came to the conclusion that somehow I was going to have to learn to trust people, otherwise I was going to slide toward self-pity no matter what. I could tell people over and over again to help the bear, but I'd still be feeling halfway sorry for myself. Also, in order to trust somebody, I decided I'd have to get over the notion that I'd ever be able to resolve the conflicts among all those little people running around inside me. For a long time, I lived by the idea that if I kept struggling with my contradictions, somehow they'd all dissolve one day into a consistent personality. The teetotaler in me would reconcile with the hedonist, the liberal with the conservative, the competitor with the Zen Buddhist, and the independent with the lonely. When all of these conflicts were resolved, I'd kept telling myself I'd be able to trust people more easily because I'd know myself better. Finally, I had to let this fantasy go and to accept the fact that I was going to continue to be all those little people. None of them was going to vanish because they were all essentially me. The part of me that hated being stereotyped as a basketball player was going to go right on acting up, and so was the part that loved the game. The part that craved new challenges wouldn't go away, and neither would the part that yearned for a place to come home to. I knew I wanted a monogamous relationship with a woman, and at the same time I sensed I was incapable of it. I was like a bird of prey who'd been circling for years, soaring because he loved flying, but also because he could never quite find the perfect place to land. For the first time, I began to see that I was close to reaching the limits inside me. That's when Sam Skolman called me early in 1973. As principal owner of the Seattle Supersonics, he had a problem. His team had one of the worst records in the NBA and also one of the highest payrolls. Season ticket sales had dropped 50% from the year before. There was dissension about salaries, and some players wanted to jump to the ABA. On top of all this, Sonic stockholders had sued Skolman for running up large debts to the several coaches he fired in mid-contract. Now he was looking for a new coach once more and asked me for some recommendations. I gave him 3 or 4 names, but he found something wrong with each of them. When I said I couldn't think of anyone else, he asked, "What about you?" "No," I said, "I don't want to do it." "Why not?" "Well, everybody knows that you never let your coaches alone. You stay involved just enough to make a mess." "I'm not like that," Skolman said. "I never interfere." "Well, I'm just not interested." "Can I call you next week?" he asked. "If you like." The next week he telephoned again. "Why don't you take the job?" "I don't want it." "What would it take to get you to do it?" "I don't know," I said. "I haven't even thought about it." "I'll tell you what," Skolman said. "I'll call back tomorrow and you tell me then what it would take." I figured that the best way to get out of this situation was to make up a list of ridiculous contingencies that nobody would accept. So when Skolman called the next day, I laid it all out, right down to the particular kind of car I wanted furnished on road trips. I wanted complete control of the franchise, including a non-interference clause that would make it a breach of the contract for any officer of the corporation to speak or act for the Sonics. I also mentioned a stack of money that would have made me blush, if I could blush. When I finished, I was surprised that Sam was still on the phone. But he didn't give me the slightest excuse to back out. He simply said, "Okay." Which is how I let myself be maneuvered into a new job as coach and general manager of the Supersonics. A move that put me back into basketball. At first, it felt more or less like an accident, almost as if I'd lost a bet. I'd gambled that Schoolman would turn me down, but when he didn't, I had to go through with it. But then the challenge of the job began to grow on me. My job was much more than rebuilding a bad basketball team. It was also to rescue a franchise that was in shambles. I'd have to really stretch myself to run the whole business. As long as I'd been around basketball, I'd never done anything like this before. I felt good about the city of Seattle from the day I moved there. It's the only place I know where rich old Republicans aren't always making speeches about how hard-pressed they are. It's also a place where hippies feel normal. They don't threaten anybody and nobody threatens them. When I was with the Sonics, I had a number of friends and supporters among the town's enormous hippie community. I suppose they valued my outspokenness more than they resented my crass materialism. On the basketball court itself, I was faced with an uphill fight. As I sat in the coach's chair for the first few exhibition games in the fall of 1973, I shook my head in amazement. It was more than just a bad team. It was completely devoid of personality. Whatever the opposing team wanted to do, we'd accommodate them, whether it was fast breaks or slowing the game down to a walk. We were like a young girl at her first dance lesson trying to follow her partner's lead. We followed all right. We were always 15 or 20 points behind. In an early exhibition game, one of the Sonic players pulled up for a 20-foot jump shot while one of his teammates was standing alone under the bucket screaming for the ball. This missed opportunity was an obvious mistake, but I didn't realize how bad a one until halftime. In the tunnel on the way to the dressing room, the player who'd taken the jump shot yelled at his teammate who'd been standing under the bucket. "Hey man," he shouted, "don't start messing with me while I'm shooting." That's how bad things were. My blueprint for building the team was a lot like Red's for the Celtics, with one major exception. The Celtics had been able to build a team during the 1950s without being financially healthy, but by the 1970s, the competition for players was so intense that a poor team couldn't keep the players it needed. I realized the Sonics couldn't lose money and build toward a championship at the same time, so in the first year, I concentrated on the business side of the franchise. We needed new television and radio contracts and every conceivable scheme to encourage support. There was a lot of hoopla, and I deliberately kept myself out front publicly during that first year, hoping to divert attention from how bad the team was. The team's record improved by 10 wins the first season. The next season, 1974 to 75, the Sonics made the playoffs for the first time ever. By the spring of 1976, after we'd made the playoffs again, we were a respectable team and we were young. With our 2 first-round draft picks that year, we got Dennis Johnson and Bobby Wilkerson, who I thought were good enough to start on a championship team. By trimming our roster, we obtained extra first-round picks in 1977 and 1978. From those 4 choices, I hoped to develop at least 2 top-notch players. My plan was to build a nucleus of self-motivated players. You can't win consistently Without such players, and when you have them, you can encourage stability and togetherness on the team by letting them know that they'll have a job with you as long as they keep performing up to their own standards. We were on the brink of contention except for one problem, and the problem was me. In the third year, after 2 good seasons of struggling, I became discouraged because I couldn't treat the players the way I'd wanted to and had promised to if I'd wanted to keep winning. All along, I told them that I'd treat them the way I'd wanted to be treated myself. I'd talk straight with them and wouldn't tell them just what they wanted to hear. I tried to tell them the truth to their faces, to say nothing personally critical of them in public, to tell them everything I knew about how to win games and how to develop a winning attitude. But I had to assume they had the basic motivation inside them. It didn't work. One reason, I think, was that I carried my commitment to honesty too far, to the point that the rigid standards I was trying to attain for myself began to interfere with the team. Once a Sonic player came up to me and delivered a speech I'd heard many times. "Coach," he said, "I know I can play, but it doesn't seem to me that you like my style, so why don't you just trade me and let me get on with my career?" I looked him right in the eye and said, "I can't trade you. I've been trying to for a month, but nobody wants you." Now, that happened to be the truth. I believed that this player had a destructive personality, and I'd been doing my best to get rid of him, but it wasn't the smartest thing to say because the player couldn't handle it. He saw me as someone trying to attack him when I was trying to help him see reality. From high school on, most gifted athletes are so accustomed to being treated dishonestly that reality is a shock to their systems. I was trying to toughen up my players' egos, but I should have known better than to carry it so far. As is true with most losing teams, the Sonic players had fragile egos, and they spent a lot of time looking for reasons not to play, pointing fingers at each other and blaming everyone but themselves. The older players in particular were always comparing paychecks with their teammates and everybody else around the league, looking for excuses not to make an effort. There's always going to be salary jealousy in the NBA, but we carried it overboard. It didn't just happen at contract time, it ran all through the season, gathering momentum from 1,000 small and imagined insults. In the heat of a game, I actually had players tell me that they weren't getting paid enough to go after rebounds in the fourth quarter, and others who told me they'd make sure we lose games if they didn't get a raise. In order to win in such an atmosphere, I had to start yelling, saying things to people that I'd never have stood for when I was playing myself. The situation was very different from my coaching days with the Celtics, when I had to yell at a few players to push them. On the Sonics, the players who showed signs of self-motivation became infected by the attitudes of the rest of the team. Of course, each generation is different, and I tried not to expect the Sonics to be like the old Celtics. If they had been, they wouldn't have needed an expensive new coach like me in the first place. They seemed young to me, and I seemed old to them, but We kept trying to adjust to each other through the end of the 1976 season. Then something happened that made me snap. The players met alone, as NBA teams do, to divide up their playoff money, and the prevailing faction voted to keep every dime for themselves. They withheld even the complimentary amounts customarily given to such support people in the franchise as the trainer, people in the front office, and assistant coach. One player hurt his knee before the season was over, so they reduced his share. 2 teammates had been hurt all year, so were voted nothing. One healthy man had not much playing time, so they wanted to reduce his share. I couldn't believe it. The money involved was a trifling sum compared to what they made. I felt so badly about the situation that I called in a couple of the players and asked the team to vote again, even though it's not really any of the coach's affair. But the result wasn't much better the second time around. The majority of the team was determined to act in a way that flew in the face of simple decency, let alone creating a team that could play and win together. It hit me then that not only was my program for the team failing, but that I didn't like most of the players or want to be around them. That's when I should have resigned. In all honesty, I should not have coached anymore. But I thought maybe things would get better. Instead, they got worse, and I finally realized that I'd run up against another limit in myself. Once the challenge of rescuing a franchise had worn off, winning basketball championships was not worth enough to me to tolerate being around people I didn't like or respect. Since it is my habit simply not to talk to people I don't like, I found it harder and harder to have discussions with many of the players. It was obvious to them that I didn't like them, and naturally they didn't like me either. Early in my 4th season with the Sonics, I knew it would be my last. I was withdrawn, not giving the players what I knew, not being as good a coach as I could have been and should have been. Under the circumstances, it was a credit to them that they won as often as they did. I just wanted to get out. My daughter Katherine and I would ride 2 games together, and I'd be so glum that I wouldn't speak a word the whole way there or back. Staying on with the Sonics that last year was the biggest mistake I've ever made, and it was the most difficult year in my adult life. On the last day of that season, I was as relieved as a GI coming home from war. When I'd left the Celtics, I'd felt as if I was running off to seek my fortune. This time I thought I was beginning to find it. Limits were on my mind as they had been for a long time. A few years earlier, I decided that I couldn't hope to resolve all the contradictions within me, and that the best I could hope for was to keep any one of them from dominating me. Physical limits are the easiest ones to accept. If I jump into the Pacific Ocean and start swimming due west, everyone would expect me to have problems before I reached Japan. It's not so easy to accept mental or emotional limitations. It's difficult, for instance, to accept the idea that it's dangerous to stretch feelings. Anything people have and enjoy, they tend to want more of it. The impulse applies almost everywhere. If someone has an exhilarating day in which everything goes just right, reaching new heights with a lover, or understanding something for the first time after great struggle, he wants another day just like it, and then one even better. Usually, the result is that the original feeling is distorted and finally ruined, so that something that should have been a source of happiness becomes one of discontent. It is extremely difficult to grasp that special feeling when it comes and to treasure it as a separate and discrete moment that happened, a gift for that day. That's a limit. Another one that I accepted years after leaving sports is the concept that happiness is limited by whatever is inside you. The basic joy I received from basketball came from within, and I think this applies everywhere in life. Like friends and lovers, my teammates filled places inside me, but I would never have put any of them in the predicament of thinking that what they did or said would determine whether I was happy or not. I can't say to someone, "If you love me, I'll be happy," because it's not true. How you and I get along may be one of the biggest parts of my life, but it's not my whole life. And I don't want it to be yours either, because that feeling exerts tremendous pressure on a single point. Recognizing the limits of what you can demand of people produces a feeling of release. You're pulling your own weight, touching them, and offering yourself without loading all your fears and troubles on them. The starting point for love is that first you must love yourself. Unless you do, there is no frame of reference for loving anyone else. If you believe that you're unlovable, how can you accept it from others? It's worth a whole lifetime of work to reach the point of saying, "I take responsibility for my own outlook, and I accept and love myself." The reward comes in those moments when you are able to give love and accept it at the same time. They are only moments, but they are the most precious ones there are. And no matter how much money or fame you acquire, how tough you are, or how many idols you break, nothing but self-acceptance can bless those moments. At times, I have been happy with expressions of love that were indirect. Once, just after my 44th birthday, I overheard a neighbor of mine ask my teenage daughter Katherine if I were a good parent. "Yeah," she answered offhandedly. "He's good." "Why?" the neighbor asked. Katherine looked at him as though he were stupid for having to ask. "Because he loves me so much," she said simply. After so many years of distance from my own children, her answer overwhelmed me. Feelings like that have a way of building up for a long time before I see them. Emotions have to percolate in me. It took me years to acknowledge that I have to make choices and to plant myself somewhere for love to grow. And it took me 7 years to marry Dee Dee. It began as a kind of Cyrano relationship in which I acted as a surrogate for a friend of mine by long-distance telephone. Never has anyone been more sincere on television than I was in those ads for direct dialing. For the first few years, it was a grueling assignment to try to woo her for my friend. I wasn't very good at it because she thought I was a boring jumble of words. I wasn't sure about her either. Then, after about 3 more years on the telephone, we actually met. Dee Dee is far too private for me to write much about her. I'll say only that she is beautiful to me and that we want from each other the same things we want to give each other. That's rare, and so is the fact that we're friends. After all these years learning things about myself, one thing I've learned is that I still don't know much about women. Often I don't have the slightest idea what Dee Dee is going to do or say from one moment to the next. Like me, she's both very bright and very stupid at the same time. She has a bunch of conflicts inside her and is one of the few people I know who shares my unorthodox view of marriage. We don't expect marriage to work wonders or to change all our glooms into joy. It just makes life better. To me, marriage is very much like the new putter I bought one year. I already enjoyed golf more than I can say, but for some reason that putter took my game into unknown heights, and I couldn't wait to get out on the course. Similarly, I already loved living, but marrying Dee Dee enhanced all the things I enjoyed doing and made them better than they'd ever been before. Dee Dee and I share the notion that limits and adventure can go together, and that's how we got in trouble on Mount Rainier. One day, about a year before we were married, I drove over to the base of the mountain and suddenly had the impulse to climb that monster, even though I'm terrified of heights. I wasn't going to conquer any mountain, just this particular one, and then I'd never need to climb another. It was one of those feelings you don't argue with. So one day the two of us went trudging up Mount Rainier, accompanied by friends and guides, weighed down with gear of every description. I was especially nervous because in the previous day's training for emergency procedures, I'd failed every time in the ice arrest and gone flying into the make-believe crevice while the trainer shook his head sadly. This shook my confidence, and I didn't have much to start with. Good sense was also in short supply. We managed to wait until the last possible week of the season in October, when the snow line was already down to Camp Paradise at 6,000 feet. This meant we had to climb the summit at 14,400 feet through fresh snow of ever-increasing depth. I didn't understand what a hardship this would be when they told us, but I soon found out for myself. It was like walking through deep sand on a beach with a 60-pound pack on your back, except that you're going uphill. By the time we reached 8,000 feet, a couple of Empire State Buildings above the base camp, I had already passed the kind of terminal fatigue I used to get on the third day of Red's training camps. At 9,000 feet, we broke through the clouds, shutting out the world below, and saw the peak of Mount Hood in Oregon. Above us was a brilliant blue, and below were white clouds. The whole universe was simplified into two colors so bright that even with sunglasses you had to squint to take them in. By now I had burned through to new layers of fatigue, and I could feel the capillaries in my lungs pounce on each breath of cold air. At 10,000 feet, Dee Dee and I straggled into the halfway camp called Muir, half an hour behind the other climbers. All too soon, we were huddled in a tiny cabin to get out of the piercing cold, and the chief guide was making a Newt Rockney speech. Shortly after midnight, he told us we would set out by moonlight for the summit, and it would be tougher than we'd ever dreamed. Lying in my sleeping bag, I couldn't believe that it was possible to be so bone-weary and yet unable to sleep. Others in the party seemed to be pitching around too, and I wasn't the only one who heard the wake-up man open the cabin door at the witching hour. Dee Dee was cheerful and talkative while everyone else was groaning. I kept watching and listening to her, thinking that in these circumstances she was acting weird. "What are you so happy about?" I growled. "Oh, I'm not going any further," she said happily. "I don't need to. I've seen the promised land." I understood, and I knew what she meant because the view from Camp Muir was as awesome as I'd ever dreamed the summit could be. So she stayed in the warm cabin for some shut-eye. "So far, I've enjoyed this," she said, "but if I go any further, I won't." Soon, we were lined up and roped together under the moonlight like convicts. At 11,000 feet, we took our first break. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and already you could see the first gray light before dawn. Everything was so still at that altitude that all the sounds of our climb were magnified. Every time someone took a step, you could hear the loud crunch of steel crampons driving into snow, and the sound seemed to drift off into nothingness for hundreds of miles. The other sound you heard was breathing, which was even louder. At that height, you take a full, forced breath every time you put your foot forward, then you step, rest, and blow the air out. It's called a lock step, and it's a slow processional. I realized that the essence of mountain climbing is to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that it takes all your concentration. Like so much else, all you have to do is to keep one step ahead, but it's hard to do. You keep bumping against the walls inside you, trying to push them back. My walls were mostly pain. There were a few thoughts, every one of which seemed brand new, but mostly it was pain. I could feel every ounce of weight in my pack and kept kicking myself for all the extras I was carrying, like the collapsible golf club I brought so that I could hit a golf ball off the top. Nice thinking, Russell. I couldn't imagine the state of mind I'd been in when I'd put that thing in my pack. During the next leg of the climb, the sun came up and the clouds down below looked small. I welcomed the light. We were passing crevasses of various sizes, some no larger than a desk, some larger than football fields. As you approached, they were white with black interiors, but when you looked directly down into them, the white turned into a pale blue and then became a deep blue. If you lifted your eyes slightly, you found yourself looking out over the whole world. We were still roped together, marching slower and slower in the deepening snow. My feet had long been numb from the cold night climb, but the morning sun baked me above the waist at 12,200 feet. When we took our next break, I found myself collapsed on the ground. One guide was going back down from here, but thereafter no one could turn around. If you fell out, they'd just leave you in a sleeping bag and pick you up on the way down. I had just broken through to the 50th new level of fatigue, and I felt something giving away inside me that I'd been fighting for a long time. The sensation was one that I've encountered many times in life when I've found myself asking, "What am I doing here?" Usually, on such occasions, I have one of my infrequent conversations with God, I tell him that if he'll just get me out of this one scrape, he'll never have to worry about me again. But this time I said, Lord, you catch me next time. I can take care of this one myself. I was too weak to laugh, but I managed to tell the God that I was turning back with him. I had visited so many places in my life that people had claimed was the mountaintop that I'd felt I'd already been there. By pushing myself and breaking barriers and experiencing that awe, I'd already done what I wanted to accomplish with Mount Rainier. To go on was not worth the pain, and I didn't mind getting my second wind on the downhill part of the mountain. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. All done. The great William Felton Russell. Second Wind. So glad we were able to read it. Hopefully it was constructive, help people get a better understanding of racism, white supremacy, learn some of the history of the NBA. We had lots of supplementary material for this book club. That's one thing I can say. Gusty has been, saying of late, hey, this has been HOF, Hall of Fame year for the cows in terms of programming, counter-racist content. One of the reasons I've been saying that, the research Gusty has done to supplement the programs, book club, that has produced so much material. I've learned so much. I've tried to share so much. Right at the center of all of this, 22 caliber killer. But I mean, even beyond, that's how we had Benjamin Green on the program. That's how we had Dr. Aram Goodsuzian on the program. Both we talked about their work on Bill Russell, the Harlem Globetrotters, racism, white supremacy, all of that, just doing research, reading, more important than watching television. Try to learn a little bit about everything so that we can solve the problem. Number to dial, 605-313 5164, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. One and done. So that is our full, audio session for the day. We don't have a second installment this time around. So concluding thoughts, what we just heard, overall takeaways from what we have learned about the great Felton X. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let's see. I'm just checking. I might be in error. I haven't been able to verify. I'll try to do so. But I think Dee Dee might be Dorothy, because it seems like the times would match up. They have Bill Russell's wife. So he married 4 different females, 3 of them white women. It seems like he had a thing for brunette white women, it would seem. One of them, I think Dee Dee, might be the white woman that he scaled Mount Rainier with. She was a beauty queen. Heard that before. Think that was J. Strom Thurmond. Go find you a young white beauty queen and, head off into the sunset. Anyway, we'll see if that's Dee Dee or not. One of the folks who wrote in, email untiljustice@gmail.com if you have final thoughts, untiljustice@gmail.com. Incidentally, I will say, I was talking about the research I posted. I've tried to share lots of the research material. If I go and find reports, things of that nature, I'm on Twitter, @untiljustice. no fan of social media, but you can always see material that I try to share related to racism, white supremacy, and then specific content that we're talking about. But with Bill Russell, I posted a report about him saying, hey, 12 dead bodies, black males in Mississippi. This is 1964. Summer of James Chaney and those two white boys, Freedom Summer as they call it. I posted that report, and as opposed to, wow, I never even heard about this. That is crazy. 12? And they got names on the report and everything, like, whoa. And Bill Russell went to Mississippi in the middle of all this, where it could have been 13. Wow, look at this. We got this tall Negro. Anybody heard from Bill Russell? No. Felton X? No. Could have easily been that way. He knew this. Said he didn't want to go. I was scared to death. Can't even drink the water. I posted the report, and as opposed to anyone having commentary, or people did, some people, but for one person, as opposed to any commentary about that, what about old Bill Russell being married to this white woman? Always the focus goes to Area 8, and I told that does come up in the book. We'll have ample opportunity to discuss that. That is not what I posted about. Distractions. One of the folks who wrote in, not distracted by Area 8, hi Gus and callers, I really enjoyed this book, me too, and learned so much, me too, even as a non-basketball fan. Can't say me too there. I have been practicing visioning techniques and see the benefits. I can say me too. Bill Russell showed so much wisdom and understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy, yet was still quite confused. Me too. As many non-white people are, including myself. This has become more evident as the book approached conclusion. Listening to Bob Cousy was nauseating. Tell me about it, weeping white man. Oh, I feel so sorry for his wife, Rose. Sadly, it does not seem as if he had much remorse for how he treated her and said very little about her as a person, but showed his passion for Iodine, black female, and Kitty Mason, white woman. Very sad. I also wonder how their children feel about this chapter of the book. Maybe they wrote a review. I do not think he ever got over the death of his mother, and this may have contributed to why he struggled to relate to his wife or wives. Dr. Welsing, paraphrasing, said, "Show me what you do with your genitals, and I will tell you what you think of yourself." Mr. Russell spent lots of time sleeping with random women and sex workers. I do not think this is a sign of self-respect. Indeed. Something about the story of Kitty Mason unsettled me, not just the fact she was a suspected racist female or sex worker. It made me think about the COINTELPRO operation that had Bill Russell under surveillance. It would not surprise me to find out that she was a spy and was there more to her disappearance. Oh, and that there was more to her disappearance than he suspected. That is a tremendous point because, that was a very popular tactic. And I mean, any of these white people that he's talking about, the white women that he's sleeping with, the white dude that invited him to meet Kitty Mason in the first place. Remember he said he was suspicious. It's a white teammate. Like any and all of these people, even the non-white, because they do, random popping in and she's doing drugs and all that. Man, oh man. Dangerous position we are in. The email again is untiljustice@gmail.com. Nab some of the folks who dialed in, *61 if you have commentary, takeaways from the book, things that you learned, thoughts on this specific section, and what you have to say, *61 if you have commentary. Let's see if people put their turkey leg down and what have you to join in. We have Lauren, retired firefighter, should be with us.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings, retired firefighter.
Yes, sir. In the first part of the reading, I was just thinking as you were reading on how under the global system of racist white supremacy, how complicated it is to quote unquote raise children, and even more complicated is to do that, and you are separated in something called divorce from the mother. And then on top of it, with the advent of females that you are sleeping with, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, teenage children are observing this on top of it. I'm being nice by saying the word complicated. If that really was the effect of what I was hearing. Yes, coaching professional athletes is very difficult. It's very difficult. For the most part, the athlete makes more money than the coaches. And by the time they've reached that level in the activity or sport, they've been through a lot as far as from a business standpoint, through recruiting and whatnot, and people telling them how good they are. And if the idea is winning, something called winning games, it is very difficult to assemble the type of order that's needed in order to achieve that goal. And sounds like Mr. Russell was not willing to go through that work, and he didn't find it out until he was already on the job. But I see it all the time, you know, when I hear about or even see professional sports in itself. The last part of the reading, and you confirmed it for me by you saying that these were white females, and I kind of like figured that out. I don't know too many non-white people who are rich classified as black that are interested into frolicking around in the snow unless they have to in order to go to work or something like that. They're not really interested in climbing a mountain. I don't know too many non-white people who are rich classified as black who read books in German, that sort of thing. So I figured that it was white females. And it reminds me of Dr. Welsing saying that, based as a psychiatrist as she was, that white women's ideal man is tall, dark, and handsome. And that, if that's true, that term defines Mr. Russell in itself. So I'm pretty sure that the white females were aggressive in their pursuit of him, and that helped him make those type of choices. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter in Florida, enjoying Turkey Day. I think it's so amazing the context of Mr. Russell's tenure coaching the Seattle Supersonics right here is that the year after he left, they hired Lenny Wilkens, black male, victim of white supremacy, who's in the Hall of Fame, and played in the NBA. They hired Lenny Wilkens the very season after Bill Russell quits. they go to the flipping championship game to game 7, no less. Like, oh, that is historic. Like, and they did lose, but then they came right back the very next. This is 2 years after he retired or quits, and they win the flipping championship with a black coach, no less. I just think that is amazing. Now, they did make super changes. Like, it's not the same team at all, but like, wow. For Bill Russell to take over a team that he said was struggling financially and all the rest, and they were terrible and all of this, and by the time he leaves, they have a flipping champion. Whew, crazy. Go Supersonics. Let's see. Lauren, if you have commentary, proceed.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. I've really enjoyed this book, so I'm glad we read it. The person who wrote in and talked about Kitty Mason and the possible COINTELPRO connection, I hadn't thought about that, so thanks. That's something I really enjoy about the book club, just getting to hear other people's ideas. The way this last part of the book was written, it kind of didn't seem like the beginning to me. I get he's at a different part of his life, but it seemed to be switching from one thing to another very quickly. It kind of like with no segues, especially the female. So I was kind of confused by the way it was written a little bit. Like when he started talking about Mary, I thought I had missed something. And then, the same thing with Dee Dee, but I guess it is what it is. On page 260, the part where he was talking about limits, I thought that was important. It says it's difficult, for instance, to accept the idea that it's dangerous to stretch feelings. Anything people have and enjoy, they tend to want more of it. The impulse applies almost everywhere. If someone has an exhilarating day in which everything goes just right, reaching new heights with a lover or understanding something for the first time after great struggle, he wants another day just like that and one even better. Usually the result is that the original feeling is distorted and finally ruined, so that something that should have been a source of happiness becomes one of discontent. It is extremely difficult to grasp that special feeling when it comes and to treasure it as a separate and discrete moment that happened, a gift for that day. That's the limit. I really like that part, and I'm glad it was included. It might have been my favorite part of this last session. And even the part when he was climbing the mountain, I was thinking, this is kind of cliche, especially for the end of a book and whatnot. But they were talking about how difficult it was to climb the mountain. And I really liked that Dee Dee just stopped at that cabin. She seemed satisfied with the point she had reached, so she just stopped. And that seemed it seemed sensible to me. And she said, so far I've enjoyed this, but if I go any further, I won't. And I think lots of people don't do that. So I really like that part. And it took Mr. Russell a little bit longer to hit that point, but he did. So I think, that's all I have for now. Thank you for letting me share.
Much obliged. I think there's something to be said about boys and gals, men and women. I could be incorrect, but I think something in terms of that decision. I'm great where I am. No need to go further. I've had a great time. It won't be fun if I move any further. I'm going to continue sleeping. That is right on. Let's see. Other folks wrote in untiljustice@gmail.com. Untiljustice@gmail.com. if you have commentary, second wind, before we wrap up. I thought that was interesting as well, in terms of, I guess maybe disjointed. That's not the word that Lauren used, but I'm saying that the final portion of it was a little disjointed, especially in comparison to the earlier part of the text, like, and he's talking about growing up in Louisiana, the Haints and all of that, and then how he migrated out to Oakland. Like, all of that seemed a little bit more organized, and some of it may be because his life at that time was so frenetic. Maybe his life, and I mean, it seems like his life was kind of disjointed. He said that it was kind of all over the place, and going from one sexual encounter to the other. And I think we even got kind of a sanitized version, because in Aram Goodsouzian's book that we talked about, he talks about Bill Russell. He lived with Jim Brown. Now, Jim Brown's sexual exploit, he's not Wilt Chamberlain, but I mean, hey, he has kind of bragged about his sexual exploits. They talk about that stud complex. Bill Russell, importantly, and the caller said, never got over the death of his mom. I think that's absolutely true, and I think he says so himself. And I think that probably had a huge impact, huge impact on how he related to females in general, especially, if it's going to be a marriage type of a thing. Anyway, he lived with Jim Brown briefly in California, and this is during the 70s, the so-called, we already heard the hippies and free love and drugs and LSD, and they're in LA, and he's Bill flipping Russell. You've been on TV all these years. You're a big star and a tall, dark, handsome, and you live with Jim Brown. Anyway, in his book, he says that I guess Jim Brown had talked to him about participating in some sort of having sexual intercourse with more than one female. And so then Bill Russell comes and tells him that he tried it and liked it and all this. So, I mean, that might be a part of why this book is so disjointed during the last, portion of it. At any rate, and I guess that would be something to think about as well. So I've been talking consistently like, hey, so we got through the whole book. No defecation in the bed. Wow, we hear about all these white chicks, white hookers, drug users, all of that. No breaking in, and he didn't even really get a lot of detail about Muhammad Ali. Like, that's another one where I kind of look like, So Taylor Branch edits this book, White Man, and you think it's more important for us to hear about all these bedroom integration than Muhammad Ali, crap in the bedroom. I mean, lots of things that by this point, the comment had been made where he was on television, and Rick Barry not only misidentified him, they pulled out a picture of his teammate Casey Jones and said, oh, look at you. They said, look at you with that watermelon grin. So not only is it, I got the racist joke, watermelon grin, really, on live television, no less, and that's not me. That's Casey Jones. I almost played that audio say. I mean, it is amazing. Anywho, I would have had to maybe say a word about that as well, to have to deal with that live. And I mean, Casey Jones looks nothing like Bill, nothing like Bill at all. At all. At all. That would be the equivalent. We need to go today. So that would be the equivalent of somebody seeing Draymond Green, Golden State Warriors. Hey, Steph Curry, what do you do? Like, what? I do not look like Steph Curry at all. What are you talking about? I know all niggers look like, but I mean, whoa. Bill Russell and Case, I mean, they're not the same height. They're not the same anything. Like, and you played. We would have had to get at least one paragraph about that. One paragraph about, and maybe, I don't, at this point, there was some information about COINTELPRO. We'd have maybe had to say something about that too, because it would have had to be like, man, I've been hanging out with Muhammad Ali. They seem to think he might be a victim of all of this. I've been chatting and hanging out with him. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like, ooh-wee, a whole lot of people that I've been chumming it up with, Medgar and Charles Evers, these people. I was at the March on Washington, dang. Maybe we would have probably had to add 3 paragraphs, maybe a whole nother chapter, or condense some of this sex with white chicks. Priorities. Same thing I said about the Twitter feed. Get distracted. Let's see. Other emails, then I'll get my notes in. Let's see. Different investor writes in, because of the recent program on the Globetrotters, I remember that I saved a program from the time I went in 1969. What in the world? Fred Hampton was killed that year. I sent you a few photos of the program in a separate email. It's interesting to look at the program within the context of racism, white supremacy. Lots of advertisements for alcoholic beverages. That is the exact thing that stood out to me. I mean, the white supremacy aspects of it, absolutely, but wow, it was like it was liquor, like Jesus Christ, like, are we at a bar? Are we going to a bar? Are we going to a bath? I thought this was a family activity. You all have children there. I thought that's what in the world? Why does everything that's supposed to be promoted to black people, involving black people, why does it have to come with all these narcotics? You got to cram it full of menthol cigarettes and Crown Royal, Schlitz, isn't that it? Schlitz malt liquor. Come on, man. But yeah, I did see that was the first, most immediate thing that I recognized. Chapter 8. Number 1. Page 247. One of my sons confided his ambition to become a pimp. It is so hard being a parent. You just hear that? Echo. A non-white victim in the global system of racism, white supremacy. Absolutely. And unless my memory is bad, I think we read previously where in Boston, because I was stunned, they said $30,000. Black person making over $30,000 for those times, and that would be today about $300,000. I did the inflation calculator. That it was so difficult to find a black person who made that much money who could kick it with Bill Russell, that the only black people who were in that income bracket were pimps, criminals, and he talked about hanging out with them. That was, Iodine. He met her and everything. And she would direct him, he said, to the soft core, because I made a point about that and saying, that's kind of pornographic. Which is the whole context for this. But I said then, dang, that's the only people that they allow to make any money. You got to be doing something illegal. You got to be an outlaw, as they say, to make, and I mean, that's not like billionaire. That's not millionaire money. That's not enough to buy a team. But I mean, wow, you're telling me a lot. But that might be that he saw his dad hanging out with other criminals. That's who I associate. Black people that have these kind of cars and look like this and dress like this. They're not on Wall Street. They're not, entrepreneurs, hedge fund managers. They're, sweet Georgia Brown, what we've been talking about this week. World is filled with pimps and hoes. That's right, too short. Number 2. Mary was crying at the idea of hundreds of years of Indian indignity reduced to hawking pots. Was this sincere or another example of tacky, manipulative behavior by suspected racists? Now that would be another one like COINTELPRO, as our female caller who wrote in for both of them, for the sex worker who, Kitty, whole library and slavery, and let's talk about McCarthyism and all that. And then for Mary as well. She just going down the road, and I just got to break out into tears. So I seen a statue of a Native American hawking cigars and whatever. Like, are you a weeping white woman? Are you serious? Sounding like Bob Cousy. Number two, page 253. Blacks have an advantage in dealing with self-pity because we have had so many opportunities to confront the impulse. Mr. Charlie, his father, make a virtue of independence. If you see me in a fight with a bear, don't help me, help the bear. This passage may relate to the criticism black people receive if we refer to ourselves as victims. What do suspected racists and many non-white people say? Don't be a victim. That's right. I'm no victim. If I'm in a fight with a bear, please help me. Absolutely, black brother. Real talk. I said, man, if you see me in a fight with a squirrel, help, please, because they gang up on you sometimes and they don't fight correctly. Like, man, I'm not on any other. As long as I'm a victim of white supremacy, until I qualify for universal man, get that squirrel up off me right now. Having enough trouble with these race soldiers? Man, Jesus Christ, all that trying to be tough and pretend, like, get out of here. Number 4. Page 257 to 259. Sonics player came up to me, Coach, I know I can play. Russell says, I can't trade you. Nobody wants you. The players met alone, as NBA teams do, to divvy up the playoff money. They withheld the complimentary amounts. Money involved a trifling sum. During my 4th season, I knew it would be my last. On the last day of the season, I was as relieved as a GI coming home from war. The challenges of being so-called in charge as a non-white victim in the global system of racism, white supremacy, including when those you are in charge of are non-white victims. The problems non-white victims have when they are supervising other non-white victims is often discussed on the Neutralizing Workplace Racism broadcasts, for sure, coming up tomorrow. Number 5, page 262. Mount Rainier. I'm terrified of heights. I found myself collapsed on the ground. I'd already done what I wanted to accomplish with Mount Rainier. To go on was not worth the pain, and I didn't mind getting my second wind on the downhill part of the mountain. As non-white victims, we can be convinced to participate in situations that, in retrospect, maybe we should have passed on. Putting yourself in potentially dangerous situations just for the sake of doing it is probably not a good idea. Showing off, doing a lot of things for the sake of dangerous things, in particular harmful things, potentially life-threatening things for the sake of showing off. I enjoyed this book selection a great deal. It allowed me to reminisce a little about my youth, but more importantly, provided a lot of constructive information about racism, white supremacy, and Mr. Russell's amazing life and his attempts to counteract the system. When I was young, I read a lot of these sports books, mainly as a fan and frustrated athlete of limited ability. Can relate to that, the latter. Trying to fantasize and obtain an insider's look at ball games. I suspect I did not pay a lot of attention to the racism aspects. I will never read these books quite the same as I once did. This is primarily due to my participation in the C.O.W.S book club. Still learning. Me too. Let's see. untiljustice@gmail.com if other folks have commentary, final thoughts on the book. Let's see. I'll get in my thoughts from the part we read this week, and then double check, see if anybody else has other thoughts, and then we can, another one bites the dust. And continuing to be very proud of the title, Stand By Our Work at the Book Club, Katherine Massey book club. I can't believe they had that trifling segment today. I'm like, oh my God, I was so disgusted. Like, I do not care at all. Even if every one of the victims from the Tops massacre was a Buffalo Bills fan, like, are you all going to help them get a grocery store? Get out of here, man. Anyway, Renthal James. From last week, and just building, some of the folks already talked about it. Lauren, the caller who wrote in, man, and maybe even the folks who are with us, you all can think about this. I'll double check before we go off. Something about, I thought about it over the week, and then what we got today, like, oh man, the way that Rose is portrayed, and even Iodine, the black females that he's sexually involved with in comparison to Dee Dee and all these white women, Kitty, like, it is astronomical. Like, I said before, he said he was naming the different ladies in his life, and he mentioned Iodine, and he mentioned Rose, black female who was married to first, who gave him 3 children, and he said that we were just married. And I said, I don't even know what that means. Like, what? Just married? Like, I feel like that's the sort of thing, like, if I'm the husband, so-called, and I said that in front of my attempted wife, like, ooh-wee. Like, at minimum, that is going to be an astronomical discussion. Like, what did you say, black brother? Like, and vice versa. Like, what? WTH, man. WTH. But and I think the caller, she wrote in, she said the same thing. Like, we didn't really hear that much about Rose as a person and really delving into her life. It was really just more about how she impacted him and coming into his life so young and kind of stabilizing things as he was beginning his professional basketball career and kind of making it an intimate space away from all the crazy racism that he was experiencing as a young person. But I mean, Kitty is a white drug addict, potentially, and street hooker. That's what he said, a whore. And the COINTELPRO aspect of it all. Just put that, there for us to think about. But she's a scholar. She's well read on everything. I defend her honor even in death. I don't even think of her as a sex. Like, she has such a lofty status. And the same thing when he's talking about all of these white women. I just thought, like, man, even Iodine, where he talks about her, she stabs him with a pair of scissors. They're having, like, drunken traffic, like chases through the city of Boston and collisions where he has to pay off the cops. Like, Jesus, like, his relationships with these black females, like Rose, it doesn't even count at all. Like, so tragic. People pointed out, many people said it just seems so sad. Like, he just leaves her. He says that I just leave her and go travel, go to Africa and go chase my white whores or, whatever. Just doing the basketball schedule where you got to travel all over the country, go to LA and smack Jerry West around every spring. And she's, left to sit at home with 3 children in racist Boston. Hope they don't break in and crap in the bed. It just, man, and it just continued this week, got even worse. Let's see. And I would expect that in terms of, even if none of these white chicks are COINTELPRO, what have you, I would expect them to be well read. I would expect them to have less stress, better lives. They're not victims of racism. That is enormous. Very sad. And common. Talked about that before. So let's see. He says, even a full-time parent would have had trouble with them, talking about his children at that age. I believe, and I was getting to know them when I was trying to sample every style and every lifestyle and golf course in the vicinity. Just the golf course again, Dr. Welsing. We're back to these ball games. I'm just like, man, like, we have children so frequently where they are not a priority at all. And Mr. Russell's children did not seem like a priority at all at this point in his life. Like, he's having, according to what's been written, according to his own testimony, all these sexual adventures with all of these different females and white women. Just that alone, like, do you really want to be bringing all of these white strangers around your offspring? Young offspring? even non-white people. I don't have offspring. But wow, I mean, Dr. Welsing talks about that. Mr. Fuller talks about that. I've heard him talk about this specifically, like, man, you have a child that is going to be classified as black, a victim of white supremacy racism. Nah, buddy, those days are long gone of I'm going and dating and you all got to look out for yourselves, or you got to, this is your life. That's what you signed up for. That's the way that we should be. All that other, not all of this is a big throwaway. This is real close in my opinion, because he said, I'm just going by what we read. He said he didn't even know his children. Distant from them. I've been running around and all the rest of it. Man, I mean, oof. Let's see. Continues. He says, his children, they hit him with larger questions. Love it when children ask questions. It wasn't long before one of my sons confided how much he always admired fancy cars, talked about that, wanting to be a pimp. That's how we are programmed, to be. And even that's fascinating. Like, does he think I'm a pimp? Like, what is his understanding of me? Like, Jesus Christ. Like, I was thinking basketball player. You don't want to be a basketball player like your dad, or a sports commentator, or on a team, or a coach. A pimp. Have you seen a pimp? Carl, oh my God, this is the, now that is something that, since we're on all these 50-year anniversaries of Shaft and Superfly, this is from that same decade. So no, I can't really say I'm that surprised that you would have a black person who grew up 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, that might be around retired firefighters' age. I don't know, it could be wrong, but yeah, I think that might have an impact where some young black children, yep, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Got my mink coat dragging on the floor as I do my pimp walk, got Superfly in the back, I'm going to be pimping. Yes, that's not confusing at all. White people to blame for that too. It's sweet Georgia Brown, Jesus Christ. That's what we've been talking about all week long. So he continues a little bit further, bottom of 247. The situation, he's talking about meeting all these females and what have you, and them commenting on who they liked or didn't like. The situation reminded me of the way my brother and I made the life miserable for all Mr. Charlie's women friends after our mother had died. We didn't want him to go out with anyone, and we alternated in driving them crazy, looking at things from the parents' point of view. For the first time, I realized how unfair we had been to Mr. Charlie. Victims guaranteed qualified. I do not take that position at all. The children are the number one priority, and it is not even close. Like I just said, you have those children, all of that stuff is signed off under the system of white supremacy. Now, if we were under the system of justice, I would reconsider totally. But given what we have, child rapists on every corner, no, all of that is done. That is absurd. I need my time. Y'all can't hog up all my time. Expect me to just devote every bit of my time and energy to you. Yes, that's what you signed up for in the system of white supremacy. And if it's more important for you to be chasing white women, especially I'm out chasing white women, you shouldn't have these children. That would stop a lot of confusion. He said complications. That would minimize some of these complications. We don't have these children since that's not really my priority. I want to go to Mount Rainier with these white chicks and do all this. Fine, do that. Don't have the children that are going to be classified as black. And then what are we doing? Are we going to Disneyland together with this white chick? Are you serious? Are you serious? And then my son wants to be a pimp. Maybe because I bring all these white women and random chicks around? Let's see. Drug using white chick? That's another, are you serious? These are the people that you want to have around your children? I don't have children. I don't have children. I don't have children. If I did, they would probably be... That Negro Gus said, better not be saying a thing about being a dad. Darn tootin'. Darn tootin'. Let's see. I think it's so cute. He talks about the joys of dialing direct. I don't even really know what that means. What sort of caveman phone techniques you had to use at that time? I have no idea. Does that mean you had to use the operator? Like, woo, what are we talking about? Cupping a string? Telegram? Like, Jesus Christ. Let's see. He says... We were driving off to California. White woman starts crying. Oh, my God, weeping. That right there, like COINTELPRO. Mary is just weeping. Oh, my God, she's so concerned about the Native American. Like, get out of here, man. Get out of here. Even pause. I remember last week when he was talking about Kitty, different white. This is the white woman that they think was on drugs, overdosed, whore. And they were talking about McCarthyism, and he said he didn't care about McCarthyism. She could have just paused right there. You should care for Paul Robeson. And stop right there. Like, you don't think this has anything to do with racism, white supremacy? You are sadly misinformed and mistaken. Now, that again, who's more informed about racism, a white whore or college graduate? Bill Russell, who's traveled the world. You don't know Paul Robeson? You were at the March on Washington. You don't know Paul Robeson? He had some problems with McCarthyism. We talked about it. We are the biography kings. Artist is revolutionary, Dr. Gerald Horne. Read that one, and we had him as a guest on the program to talk about that. He had problems with McCarthyism, as did Sidney Poitier. I just read that this week. The late Sidney Poitier passed away this year. He was doing movies. And they got all riled up and what have you. I think he was involved. I have to read you the part from the Globetrotter book, but they got all riled up at the director about this. Sidney Poitier was in the film and all this other nonsense. Like, gee whiz, like, yes, everything relates to racism, white supremacy. Great Paul Robeson. Let's see. Weeping white woman. Love is used so much in this book, and what are we even talking about? You don't have love without justice. Neely Fuller Jr. You cannot have love in a system of white supremacy, and it's not even defined. Like all of this, I loved her, but I loved everything and nothing at all. What? What? That's what I said when Lauren, she said it seemed kind of, I don't know, a little disorganized. His life, I think, was quite disoriented. If you're hanging out, and I think also if you're hanging out with all these white people that are doing drugs, if that's the sort of company that you keep, it would not surprise me at all if you experimenting a little bit, since that's what's, going around. These people that you're hanging out, again, this is the as he said, the hippie era. Would not surprise me at all. Let's see. He says, this talking about Mary, my spirit sank when I realized what Mary had given me. She made me believe that I could love and be loved again, and was the first person since my mother. Now, I mean, Jesus H. Christ. You're married to a black female, children with her and all that. I'm not saying, that's got to mean that's, I'm certain people frequently have children with people, married people that, are not that important to them. They're just, as they say, going through the motions. Got all of that. But I mean, wow. This white woman, just backing up to read this again. My spirit sank when I realized what Mary had given me. She made me believe that I could love and be loved again, and was the first person since my mother that I felt I could trust completely. That right there. We do not understand what it means to be white. This is the same white woman who is breaking down crying, going past the sign of a Native American, and I got to break out into tears. That right there is extraordinarily untrustworthy to me. Like, just a white person weeping allegedly about racism is about the most untrustworthy thing I can think of, or it's pretty high up there. Victim of white supremacy. I'm still learning myself. I'm a victim of white supremacy, but I mean, yeah, that, wow, really stood out to me as victims. We are victims. Let's see. Oh, did I get I didn't get that yet. Okay, let's see. Oh, it's right here. I was right on time. So he talks about not wanting to be married and all of that. It's not going to work in a system of white supremacy anyway, which is probably why he was married so many times and why he didn't really want to be married to begin with. He says, I felt so isolated during this period that I was happy to see the mailman every day. Now, that is sad. You're having all these random meaningless sexual encounters, and then just got to look for companionship. I mean, that's, wow. For all my running around, there was nothing and no one left for me to touch except the space that Mary had left. White woman. I was close to feeling sorry for myself, which set off an alarm systems in my head. I could see Frank Ramsey flashing his toothless grin, Mr. Charlie lecturing me, all of this about, I think there's so much false bravado, and sometimes that might be a defense mechanism, being so beaten down and traumatized in the system to try to muster together whatever sense of dignity or whatever we can cobble together as some sort of armor. But yeah, I do not see any benefit for all of that false bravado. And if I'm going to be in a fight with the bear and help me, and no, let's not lie to ourselves. Let's try to be as honest as we can about things that are happening in the world and move forward. I can see the value in not, as he said, wallowing in self-pity. But hey, Mr. Fuller, way back, we asked him, are you self-loathing? And he said, absolutely, I'm a victim of racism. That'll motivate me to solve this problem. Different ways of looking at it, I guess. Let's see. He says, so he comes to coach the Supersonics. I think this is so amazing in one respect. When he says Sam Skolman contacts him, 1973, come coach the Supersonics, and he says, no, I don't want to do it. He says, well, think about it. What would it take for you to do it? And he writes down this really intricate list, what car I need when we go, to play the Atlanta Hawks and blah, 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 and, an astronomical amount of money and no meddling. And if that happens, then, that's a breach of contract. And I mean, that is, wow. That right there is the science of counter-racism. Details, and I mean explicit details, where you're covering every possible scenario. If this happens, this happens, this happens. He didn't just say, oh, I want $20 million. No. Oh, I do want $20 million, maybe $25 million. But I need this and this and this and this and this. And you're not going to do this, like trying to do as much as if I'm in charge. I'm going to try and do as much as I can to make that true. Wow. Right on for Bill Russell. Now, the thing is, he said he did all this because he thought this white man wouldn't agree to all of this. If he really didn't want to coach, which it sounds like that is the case, he really, after 4 years, I really didn't want to do this. Nah, I'm good. We could just make this a short conversation. Nah, I'm good. Why don't you take a day to think about it? Nah, I'm good. What can we do? Nothing. Like, I'm having too much fun chasing these white women or spending time with my children. A little bit of both. I'm trying to get one of those, out of there. But hey, all got our vices. But yeah, I'm good. Money, I'm good. Just make it a short conversation. No need for all of that. So you don't get maneuvered into doing stuff that we don't like, because white people can surprise you, sometimes. Let's see. I appreciate the fact that he said that I mentioned a stack of money that would have made me blush if I could blush. I appreciate that he said that, because, hey, system of white supremacy, that I was tickled pink, and all of those metaphors that take the perspective that I am a pale, melanin deficient person classified as white, where I can blush. my lack of pigmentation. No, that is not the case. I have a lot of melanin, so no, I don't turn red. And that came up, I think, retired firefighter was saying, hey, I think this is a white woman because, yeah, I don't turn red when I pass a Native American statue because I got to break out in tears. That doesn't happen. And no, I don't blush if I think I'm doing something incorrect or asking for an unsightly amount of money. I don't blush. I might feel some type of way about it, but my cheeks, they are still going to look nice and bronzed and melanated. Let's see. I was so geeked about this book ending in Seattle. Wacky. He says, speaking of which, I felt good about the city of Seattle from the day I moved there. Me too. It is the only place I know where the rich old Republicans aren't always making speeches about how hard pressed they are. And I don't really know. I guess they would say this is an area where the white people who, describe themselves as so-called Democrats, they win a lot of the so-called professional elections that are held in this area and what have you, if that means anything to you. Racism, white supremacy still dominates these parts, Pacific Northwest. He continues, it's also a place where hippies feel normal. They don't threaten anybody and nobody threatens them. When I was with the Sonics, I had a number of friends, that F word, and supporters among the town's enormous hippie community. Now, and particularly this time, I'm very, very sure he is talking about white people. Victims guaranteed qualified. All of this is known as hippie land, really. You can run that from San Francisco, L.A., all the way up. Matter of fact, Bill Walton, who he talked about, right in. I had him in. He mentioned Bill Walton. He said, who I think is a great fella, by the way. Bill Walton played at UCLA, Southern California, was drafted by the Portland Trailblazers. 3-hour drive from Seattle, where I'm sitting at right there, right now. But all of that is hippie land, granola territory. They had the Black Panther Party right there in California, and all of that area. All of that area is dominated by white supremacy, racism. Oregon had in their state constitution no niggers. They had internment camps right here, Washington, for so-called Japanese, and in California too. But it does enchant many folks, having refined racists. Cannabis smoke. They got legal cannabis now. So, but this area has been renowned for that for decades and decades and decades, even way back then. But the refined racists confound many of black people. California, because Essie Mae Washington Williams, remember we read her beginning of the year, she sounded the same way about California. Like, oh my God. And I probably would too if I had grown up in South Carolina or Pennsylvania, where they lynched Zachariah Walker and then came out to California. Wow. This place is amazing. Look at these hippie white people. They're so cool. All my hippie white friends. Let's go smoke a doobie, get some grass. Let's see. He says, when he talks about when he's coaching for the Supersonics and he didn't like the players, and the episode about how they didn't want to divvy up the playoff money, ooh, buddy, that is all the time. And I guess you can think about it however you want to. Now, the time period that he's talking in the 70s, it was way less money. I mean, you might live in that. He said it's not a whole lot of money. Whatever. For black basketball players who at that time, it's not like you're going to end your career and have your $5 million in the bank or $20 million in the bank that you can parcel out and live comfortably for the rest of your life. No it is way smaller. And you didn't have all the Nike deals and all that. You're probably not going to be going and doing television contracts and all the rest. I mean, it's just a different world at that time period. That's number one. Number two, now that it is astronomical sums of it, $2 Chuck, Charles Barkley, got approximately $200 million to talk about basketball. The players make more, the best of them. So it is reported where you have these. Matter of fact, I mentioned Draymond Green already, right? He was in the news at the beginning of the season for punching a teammate. Black male. Anti-blackness again. Now, the reports are part of this violent brouhaha, money. Who's going to get exactly what Bill Russell talked about, players being upset about salary and how much does he make, and I'm supposed to get this. Are you going to get a new contract? Am I going to get a new contract? Is he going to get an extension? Is your extension going to mess up my money? All of that is still, even now, everybody, players that aren't very good will make, $10 million, $20 million. Players that aren't even very good, much less somebody who's oh my God, Bill Russell, if he played now, would probably be a billionaire. It's no probably to just go look the people who win the MVPs, those type players now. LeBron James, Stephen Curry, Giannis. These people are signing $250 million contracts, maybe more sometimes. That's the sort of contract Bill Russell would have gotten easily. 2 or 3 of those right on and the endorsement deals, Nike and everything else, podcast. He'd have been a billionaire. All kinds of white whores. Whew, man. Let's see. But it's always a reason to brawl. Like, oh man, they keep while the owners, Red Auerbach and Company, now these franchises because of all of these black players, now they got black players from all over the world. Now these franchises are worth billions of dollars. And they still keep the players squabbling over, whatever. But the scraps have gotten substantially larger from, way back when. Let's see. He has a few references to kind of white literature where he describes himself as Cyrano. I think that's where the white guy in the fictional tale, he goes to try to romance the white woman for a different person who doesn't feel confident or what have you. Incidentally, that was Bill Russell. He said he was the one who didn't feel confident talking to females for much of his life, which may stem back to the loss of his mother, I think. Some of our other listeners as well, maybe. It's so wild. I literally see Mount Rainier every day, and I have seen Mount Rainier like every day. I think the whole time we've been on the program. I literally look at Mount Rainier every day. One, we talked about this before because that is a national monument. They have whole reports about, man, what are we going to do to get niggers out to national monuments? And why don't black people go to national monuments like Mount Rainier? I'm so sad to say that I have lived in Washington State the entire time the C.O.W.S has been on the air, and I have never been to Mount Rainier. I even had the opportunity to go to Mount Rainier. It's like, Mount Rainier, I could go to Mount Rainier, or I could stay here and have peppermint hot chocolate and watch TV. As I said, I have never been to Mount Rainier. Man, I have not made good decisions. I don't know, that was uncomfortable. It was cold. Like, I'm not a fan of cold weather, like, at all. Like, man, we would have to do Mount Rainier, like, in the summertime. When, because he said they went in October and the snow, that is not something that would excite me. I don't do cold weather. I don't like cold weather and the snow, and we got to bundle up, and I might freeze to death and my toes might be frostbite. Like, yeah, you said we got peppermint hot chocolate? Like, man, you had me at peppermint. Take some great pictures. Let's see. That was 2 parts. Yes, I'm very sad that I haven't been to Mount Rainier, even though I do see it all the time. Hopefully I'll put that on my bucket list, as they say. I'll be able to go before I kick the bucket. Let's see. That one step at a time. He says at the height, you take a full forced breath. Every time you put your foot forward, then you step, rest, and blow the air out. It's called a lockstep, and it's a slow process, slow processional. I realize that's the essence of mountain climbing, is to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that it takes all your concentration. I thought that was so important because that's so many things. It's just literally just putting one foot in front of the other, and sometimes that can be very difficult. Distractions, but it's just one foot in front of the other, just staying very focused on what these sometimes very minute details are. One foot in front of the other and breathe. That's all we're focused on, nothing else. It might be, as he said, slow processional, but just stay the course, one foot in front of the other. Sometimes that is the labor of counter-racism. One foot in front of the other. Just stay focused. This problem can be solved. See if we can expedite the process if possible. Let's see. Any of the other folks who are with us have commentary, like I said, especially that, how the white women and his trysts with these white women in comparison to like Iodine, his wife Rose, how they are the females that he's had like sexual encounters with. Folks had any thoughts on that or anything else that stood out from the text? Folks have thoughts?
Yes, I've always felt that it's easy for white people, and I think they're drawn to do it also because it makes them feel like gods to tell some truths about racism, white supremacy, and that impresses non-white people, especially non-white people who are racially classified as black. We would think that white person can't do any wrong, and also I have witnessed non-white black people actually defend a white person that says some things that are true about racism, white supremacy, So I kind of feel that way about reading this particular book about Mr. Russell, that he's easily impressed with white people who from the era that he's from, where white people would literally be in your face about and tell you about negative things concerning black people, and for him to go from that to, because of his status as a professional athlete mainly, if white people would have admiration for him, and some white people, in this case some white women, would say some intellectual things that would impress him very easily, and that's what I'm hearing as far as that part of the reading, and those are just my thoughts, just by hearing the reading of the book, that he was like quite impressed, and he would things that he probably would disregard from a black person, he probably would allow with the white person, especially the white whore that hands him some books, that sort of thing. that he's impressed. He seemed to be impressed by that. And the idea of going to a mountain, I don't think he initiated that. I think the white woman did. That alone, it says something to me, about, and he's not alone, as far as that's concerned. He's not alone in how we can easily be impressed by white people. And those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Now, wait a minute here, brother firefighter. He said, Dee Dee and I share the notion that limits and adventure can go together, and that's how we got in trouble on Mount Rainier. One day, about a year before we were married, I drove over to the base of the mountain and suddenly had the impulse to climb that monster, even though I'm terrified of heights. I wasn't. That's what he wrote. Why you say you think he fibbed to us? You think the white woman, that was her idea?
Well, if that's so, he can do that by himself. He certainly has the money. He certainly has the money to be able to do that by himself. And one more thing that I wholeheartedly agree with you on is the idea of having children and the activities that he was having. You got to put your time and energy towards those children. That is a responsibility or obligation that a attempted parent under the global system of racist white supremacy has to perform, or try to anyway, is what I'm saying. And I only have one, and that's something that you have to do. Yeah, that's something that you're obligated to do. And I understand the idea as a professional athlete, that sort of thing, but it still is ways that you can get that done. As far as, even to the standpoint of taking them with you in some cases, as opposed to taking a white whore with you. That's a problem to me. But anyway, yeah, that was my answer to what you were stating. He can climb the mountain on his own if he is interested in challenges, that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with that. He certainly would deserve it as far as where he is able to devote his time and hard work and whatnot, and for some sort of relaxing exercise, climb a mountain. But climbing a mountain with a white woman is a different situation altogether. If I am going to climb a mountain with a female, it's going to be a non-white black female. VGQ. That's it.
VGQ indeed. I am never going to look at Mount Rainier again. My goodness, man, every time now, Bill Russell and his white woman. That is it. When I read that and had to see it again, he's scared of heights. Now I know sometimes people do say that they want to confront their fears and, we're going to scale this mountain or what have you, but that is, I don't know. Did the white woman have a hand in just to get them on this mountain climbing trip? Anywho, let's see. I don't know if Lauren has commentary to add in before we wrap. Anybody else? Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. So she is here. Lauren, anything else you wanted to get in?
I don't have anything else about this book, but what is the next book going to be?
I'm not totally 100% locked in for the next book yet. Still trying to make up my mind. I was pretty certain we were going to read Albert Woodfox's biography, Kings. We were going to read his memoir, Louisiana. Stay right in line, even all the way back, the serial killer down in Louisiana, Ronald Dominic. But there was a different book that came to my attention, also biography, or actually two of them that came to my attention, and I'm having to make a decision as we head into next week, so I don't want to give out a book until I'm totally sure. I think I'll have my mind made up. Today is Thursday. I think I'll have my mind made up by the compensatory call-in. So I think by Saturday I'll be able to tell people what the next book will be. We'll be ready to roll for Thursday, and I'll post it, share, so people can get a copy if they want to read along and all the rest. But I'll have my mind made up by Saturday. Compensatory call-in.
Okay, thanks.
Right on. Let's see. I'll double check my email, make sure I didn't miss any other comments that folks had on the great Bill Russell and his memoir. Learned so much about the Harlem Globetrotters. I had never thought of them as a minstrel show until we read this book and hearing Bill Russell, and he said it so definitively. He came back and repeated it in his critiques of Abe Saperstein and all of that. We had the program this week with Benjamin Green, his book, Spinning the Globe, about the Globetrotters and Abe Saperstein and all the white supremacy racism. You didn't hear that broadcast, go back, catch it in the archives. Phenomenal for many reasons. But man, I learned so much reading this text, hearing about the life and times of Bill Russell. Again, if you have younger people, they're interested in basketball, they watch basketball, have them read some. I don't think this book would be difficult. I think if I was in high school or something, I could read this book. This is not filled with, huge words that you would have to look up. And what does that mean? It's not Latin and all that in it. And it's not super long. I think it's less than 250 pages, so it's not super long. In fact, we've got these so-called holidays coming up. If you have students, they're, intelligent, they use their brain computers. If they're in college, looking to go to college, hey, I'm universal woman, universal man, you could easily have them read this book. If they have so-called winter break, they're going to be out of school for 2-3 weeks. This book is easily short enough. You could finish this book over winter break. If you have some folks who read, it's less than 250 pages. You could finish this book in a week if you read a little bit every day. Read, write a report. What does this book teach you about racism, white supremacy, the history of basketball? Compare and contrast how the black females are presented in the book, how the white women are presented. Now, that would be a great one. If anybody has offspring, if they get that project, email it to Gus. We'll read it on the air. I'll put it on my blog as well, racism-notes.blogspot.com. But because it's reader friendly, I think. People talk about wanting a library for their children to have. If we lived in Massachusetts, maybe anywhere in New England, and I had children, oh yeah, you got to read that book on Bill Russell. We can't be in Massachusetts, can't live in Boston, have a connection to this area, and you don't know who Bill Russell is. Why they got all this hoopla this year. You got children, period. They're interested in basketball, sports. Read this book. Write a report. What did you learn? Would be great. I wish I had read this book. All the time I wasted watching basketball, I wish I had read this book. I would have been so much more informed about lots of things, especially the greatness of victim of white supremacy, Bill Russell. Anywho, we will be here tomorrow for Neutralizing Workplace Racism. I thought, hey, we'll be able to have a little snippet, go back and revisit. We just had reading more important than watching television. The great Nairobi Thompson just had her on the program talking about her experience. She had to write this book twice, going to get that doctorate. It's like, man, I'll play a little snippet where we talked about wardrobe in the workplace. I looked at the news reports for just workplace racism, just the Walmart shooting alone. Black male manager, the great VA, allegedly killed 6 people. Might because they said some of the victims were in the hospital and might not make it, so it might be more fatalities, as we find new information. But they said he apparently had some sort of conflict with some of the employees, allegedly, and shot and killed these folks this week out in Chesapeake, Virginia. We talk about that on Workplace Racism. Had someone, I think, who shared, man, I had a coworker who said, I'm going to shoot you. I said, take that sort of thing seriously. Gavin DeBecker, The Gift of Fear. They say, and he wrote in his book, these sort of events happen. He talks about workplace racism specifically, or workplace violence and shootings. He said, generally, there is evidence. These people made comments. There was evidence that they might have some sort of violent outburst. They said this person, apparently there was some sort of conflict, allegedly, with some of the other coworkers and what have you. Be alert in the work, and definitely, I'm going to shoot you. You should take that serious. And if you have other coworkers who don't take that seriously, hey, have that report. This is why we have to take safety serious. Threats of violence and shooting someone in the workplace seriously. Same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. They probably have, this is so current, they'll probably have new information, but that's one reason. Can't even do the revisit. Like I said, the whole year, it's been so many reports on racism in the workplace. It has been absolutely staggering. So we will check in tomorrow. And that's on a week where most people, this is a so-called holiday week, so normally there are fewer reports about labor because most people aren't even working this week to make the reports. Not so this time around. Like, we're not even taking a holiday from the shooting. I got to go to Walmart and shoot up people while they're trying to get their turkey and cranberry sauce. In addition to all the other neutralizing workplace racism. It was absolutely stunning. Once again, the volume of reports. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Compensatory call Saturday. Much obliged for everyone tuning in. Thank you to our female narrator. She did half of the work, make it a little bit easier. That made it so that I could have a little bit of free time to go and do some research and get some of the other folks to come hang out, be guests on the program. Thank you to our female who helped us with the narration. Much obliged for folks tuning in. Hope it was worthy of your Thursday evening. Be safe out there if you're with non-white people, victims of white supremacy over the next few days. Hopefully it will be constructive. Hopefully you had lots of veggies, didn't eat toxic, poisonous, fried, greasy nonsense that's just going to put unnecessary pounds and cholesterol and MSG in your system. Maybe even get out, get a little exercise. Maybe y'all can do a little hike together. Talk about, I don't know, Bill Russell or something constructive. Drink water, even though I know it's cooler. They might come and give you a cup of that old fatty, sugary eggnog with, some tonic in it. No way. Water. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Watch out, Bill Russell hanging out with those old drug-using white women. Yeah. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling, no gossiping, no throwaway offspring. Producing children in the system of white supremacy racism, that is number one priority. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.